Welcome to our deep dive into the world of TSMC. Yeah, we've got some fascinating research and articles about this semiconductor giant. And trust me, it's not just about the chips in your phone. There's a lot more to their story.
What's really captivating about TSMC is that their journey is deeply connected to the rise of so many tech companies you use every day. We're going to uncover how their business model, along with some pivotal decisions by their founder, Morris Chang, really shaped the landscape of modern technology as we know it.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Chang started TSMC at 56. You know, an age when a lot of people are considering retirement. What does that tell us about his character?
Well, it certainly speaks volumes about his long-term vision. He wasn't chasing a quick win here. He was laying the foundation for something much bigger. And this foresight was crucial to TSMC's strategy, especially in those early days when they weren't exactly working on the most glamorous projects.
Right, they were taking on those leftover chip orders, the ones that companies like Intel weren't interested in. It wasn't glamorous. But it sounds like there was a method to Chang's approach. He was already anticipating the fabless revolution. Can you explain what that means for those of us who aren't chip experts?
Absolutely. A fab is short for a fabrication plant, basically the expensive, complex facilities where chips are made. Chang foresaw that more and more companies would design their own chips, but wouldn't want to invest in building their own fabs. That's the fabless model. TSMC essentially bet on becoming the go-to manufacturer for these companies.
It's a risky bet, right? Especially because it meant years of less profitable work. But there's a story about Gordon Campbell approaching Chang for funding at General Instrument. That really illustrates how forward-thinking Chang was.
Yeah, Campbell was planning a new company, and he told Chang that he wouldn't need much funding because he wasn't building a fab, he was going fabless. It's a perfect example of how Chang was ahead of the curve, recognizing the potential of this model even when it was still in its infancy.
So this early bet on the fabless model set the stage for TSMC's rise. And one of the key partnerships that emerged from this was with Nvidia, right?
Exactly. And their relationship is a fascinating study in contrasts. When Chang first met Jensen Huang, Nvidia's CEO, TSMC was already a billion-dollar company, while Nvidia was this fledgling startup with just a handful of employees.
It sounds like a classic David and Goliath situation. What did Chang see in Nvidia that made him decide to work with them?
He saw potential in Jensen Huang and the vision he had for graphics chips. Remember, this is before Nvidia became the gaming and AI powerhouse we know today. Chang was willing to bet on them, even when they were on the brink of bankruptcy.
So he saw something that others missed. And this faith in Nvidia was put to the test in 2009, right, when TSMC had some manufacturing issues. And it had a huge impact on Nvidia.
Yeah, there were some serious quality control problems that resulted in faulty chips. And for Nvidia, this was a potential disaster, millions of dollars at stake. It also led to layoffs at TSMC. And some of those affected workers even protested outside Chang's home.
Wow, that's intense. It really puts a human face on these large-scale tech events. So what happened? How did they navigate that crisis?
Well, Chang took decisive action. He returned as CEO, made fixing the issues with Nvidia his top priority, and utilized what's now famously called pizza and salad diplomacy to resolve the dispute.
Pizza and salad diplomacy. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it was Chang's way of combining business with personal connection. He invited Jensen to his home for dinner, pizza and salad, a meal they'd shared many times before. No business talk was allowed until a specific time. Then Chang presented his solution over $100 million to settle the issue and gave Jensen 48 hours to accept. No negotiations, no arbitration.
That's quite a bold move. What happened next?
Jensen accepted. And this act really solidified their partnership, a partnership that would prove pivotal for both companies.
Yeah.
It shows the power of strong relationships in an industry that can be intensely competitive.
It seems like TSMC was in a prime position for the rise of smartphones. They were making these strategic bets, building these relationships. And then they decided to make this massive investment in their 28-nanometer manufacturing process. We're talking billions of dollars. Why was that particular process so crucial?
Well, the 28-nanometer process was seen as the sweet spot for chips at the time, especially for this emerging smartphone market. It offered the right balance of performance and power efficiency, which was essential for mobile devices. TSMC was essentially betting that this was the technology of the future.
But then Apple came along and threw a wrench into their plans, right?
Yes. Apple was also looking to make chips for their iPhones, and they initially seemed interested in TSMC's 28-nanometer process, but then in a move that highlighted Apple's notorious secrecy, they changed their minds. They wanted a different, more challenging process, 20-nanometer.
And this was a process TSMC hadn't even planned on developing at that point. What a dilemma.
Mm.
Should they invest even more money to please their biggest potential customer, or stick to their original plan?
It was a pivotal moment for TSMC. And it was further complicated by the fact that Terry Gou, founder of Foxconn, a major Apple supplier, brought Apple's COO, Jeff Williams, to dinner at Chang's home.
Another crucial dinner party. What happened at this one?
Well, there was definitely some tension in the air. Apple was adamant about needing that 20-nanometer process, and TSMC had to decide if they were willing to take on this challenge, even if it meant delaying their own plans.
So what they decide? Did they go for it?
Chang, ever the strategist, came up with a plan. He decided to take on debt, rather than cut dividends or issue new stock to fund the 20-nanometer development. This showed his commitment to Apple and his confidence in their future partnership.
But things didn't exactly go smoothly, did they? I mean, Apple was also considering Intel for their chip manufacturing at this point.
You're right, and that put the entire deal with TSMC in jeopardy. It was a tense time in the rivalry between Intel and TSMC. Remember, Intel was once the undisputed king of semiconductors. But by 2011, the landscape was changing.
That's a reminder of how quickly things can shift in the tech world. What was Chang's reaction to this development?
He wanted to understand Apple's reasoning, so he met with Tim Cook. Cook's explanation for potentially choosing Intel was simple but telling. He said, Intel just doesn't know how to be a foundry. And that highlights the fundamental difference in their cultures and their approaches to chip manufacturing.
So TSMC agreed to Apple's 20-nanometer request, but it meant delaying their own development of the even more advanced 16-nanometer process. What were the consequences of that delay?
Well, the delay had a significant ripple effect. It gave Samsung, another major player in the semiconductor space, an opportunity to get ahead of TSMC in the race for 16-nanometer technology. And then came a blow for Chang. He discovered that Apple had given their initial 16-nanometer orders to Samsung.
After all that effort and investment, TSMC was seemingly sidelined. How did they react to that news?
It was certainly a setback. However, Jeff Williams reassured Chang that once TSMC's 16-nanometer process was ready, Apple would buy all their chips from them.
That must have been a relief. It shows a remarkable level of trust between these companies.
It certainly does. It also illustrates the complex interplay of competition and collaboration that exists within the semiconductor world. But this situation with Samsung would ultimately foreshadow TSMC's future dominance in the industry.
It sounds like their journey is full of twists and turns. I'm curious to hear more about how they navigated these challenges and ultimately emerged as the leader they are today. But we've covered a lot of ground already. Let's take a pause here and dive deeper into the next chapter of TSMC's story. In part 2 of this deep dive, we left off with TSMC facing a bit of a setback with Samsung snagging those initial 16-nanometer orders from Apple. It seems like a crucial moment in their journey.
Yeah, it really was. And this whole situation with Apple and Samsung throws a spotlight on something called the learning curve in the semiconductor industry.
Okay, for those of us who don't live and breathe silicon, what exactly is the learning curve? And why is it so important?
Well, it's a concept that applies to manufacturing in general, but the basic idea is that the more you produce something, the better you get at it, and your costs go down. Think about those early cars compared to mass-produced vehicles today.
Right. Makes sense. But how does that translate to something as complex as chip manufacturing?
It's all about volume. In the semiconductor world, the more chips you produce, the more you learn about optimizing the process. You get better yields, fewer defects, and that means a lower cost per chip.
So the company that makes the most chips has a huge advantage.
Exactly. And this is where TSMC's strategy really shines. They understood the power of the learning curve better than anyone else.
So how did they use this to their advantage? Was it just about churning out as many chips as possible, even if it meant taking a hit on profits early on?
Well, that's a big part of it. Early on, they were willing to take on less profitable orders, even if it meant operating at a loss in the short term. This allowed them to build up experience, refine their processes, and ultimately move down that learning curve faster than their competitors.
It sounds like they were playing the long game, sacrificing immediate gains for long-term dominance.
Precisely. And this approach paid off massively. As they gained volume, their costs went down, allowing them to offer more competitive pricing, which in turn attracted even more customers, further increasing their volume and driving down costs. It became a virtuous cycle.
So they essentially created a snowball effect, using their understanding of the learning curve to gain this unassailable lead.
That's a great way to put it, and that's why TSMC is in such a strong position today. They have the largest market share, the most advanced technology, and the lowest costs, a winning combination that's very hard to beat.
This whole strategy sounds incredibly calculated, like they had a master plan all along.
It was certainly strategic, and Chang's deep understanding of the learning curve was at the heart of it. He recognized that becoming the volume leader was the ultimate goal, and he was willing to make the tough decisions necessary to get there.
It's fascinating how one person's vision can have such a ripple effect, shaping an entire industry. But Chang's understanding of these dynamics wasn't just intuition, right? Didn't he have some experience with this from his time at Texas Instruments?
Absolutely. Back in the early 1970s, while at Texas Instruments, Chang was deeply involved in developing and refining the learning curve theory.
So this was before he even founded TSMC. It seems like this experience really laid the groundwork for his approach to building the company.
Yes, this experience was crucial. He even worked closely with Bill Bain, a pioneer in strategy consulting from the Boston Consulting Group, who was brought in to help Texas Instruments understand the implications of the learning curve.
Wait, the Boston Consulting Group as in the BCG?
Yeah,
That's a big deal.
the very same. And Chang was right there in the thick of it. Immersing himself in strategic thinking and analysis, it clearly had a profound impact on his understanding of how to build a successful business.
So TSMC's success wasn't just about being in the right place at the right time. It was decades in the making, rooted in Chang's early experiences and his deep understanding of market forces.
You've hit the nail on the head. TSMC's success is a culmination of Chang's vision, his strategic thinking, and his willingness to make bold bets based on a deep understanding of the industry. It's a story that has valuable lessons for any business leader.
Absolutely. And one of those lessons seems to be the importance of long-term thinking, even when it means making short-term sacrifices. And this long-term vision was put to the test again as the smartphone era was dawning, wasn't it?
That's right. Remember that massive bet they made on their 28-nanometer process? They were basically betting the company on it.
They must have had a lot of confidence in their analysis to make such a huge investment. What made them so sure that 28 nanometer was the right move?
Their market research, their R&D team, their new business development department. It all pointed toward 28-nanometer being the sweet spot for the smartphone era. They believed it offered the ideal balance of performance and power efficiency that smartphones needed.
So they were confident that this was the right technology at the right time, even though it was a huge gamble. And then, as you mentioned earlier, Apple threw them a curveball by wanting 20 nanometer chips instead.
Apple and their love of secrecy, it created a huge dilemma for TSMC. Should they pour billions into a technology they hadn't even planned on developing, all to satisfy their most promising customer?
That's a tough call. What did they end up doing?
Well, Chang, ever the shrewd negotiator, found a middle ground. He struck a deal with Apple where TSMC would take on half of their demand for 20-nanometer chips. It was still a big investment, but it allowed them to mitigate some of the risk.
So they appeased Apple without completely derailing their own plans. But didn't this decision also contribute to that setback with Samsung?
Yes, that's right, because they had to divert resources to develop the 20-nanometer process for Apple. It delayed their work on the 16-nanometer process, and this gave Samsung the opportunity to leapfrog them and secure those initial 16-nanometer orders from Apple.
It's amazing how one decision can have such a cascade of consequences. But even with these bumps in the road, it seems like TSMC was on a trajectory toward becoming the major player they are today.
Absolutely, and part of that success is due to the fact that they aren't just making chips. They're masters of the manufacturing process itself.
Okay, let's talk about that. For most of us, the world of chip manufacturing is a complete mystery. Can you shed some light on what makes TSMC so good at it?
Well, it's a fascinating and incredibly complex process. TSMC has invested billions in building these state-of-the-art fabrication plants, called fabs for short. These facilities are like something out of science fiction.
Yeah, I've heard them described as futuristic cities filled with robots and lasers. What's it actually like inside one of these places?
It's all about precision and control. Imagine rooms cleaner than a surgical operating room, filled with machines that can manipulate materials at the atomic level. We're talking about creating features on chips that are just a few nanometers wide, which is smaller than a strand of DNA.
It boggles the mind to think about the level of sophistication involved. And TSMC is at the forefront of this, right? They're constantly pushing the limits of what's possible.
Exactly. They've been pioneers in every major advancement in semiconductor manufacturing, from deep ultraviolet lithography, which is like using incredibly precise light beams to etch patterns on chips, to advanced packaging techniques that allow them to cram more and more transistors onto a single chip.
So it's not just about making chips. It's about mastering that entire process, from design to manufacturing. And their location in Taiwan has played a key role in their success, hasn't it?
You're absolutely right. Their main hub, Hsinchu Science Park, is often called the Silicon Valley of Asia.
What makes that location so special for a company like TSMC?
It's all about the ecosystem. TSMC is surrounded by a dense network of suppliers, partners, research institutions,
Yeah.
and a highly skilled workforce. It's like a perfect storm of factors that have all come together to create this semiconductor powerhouse.
So it seems like their success is a combination of factors. Their deep understanding of the industry, their commitment to pushing those technological boundaries, the strategic advantages of their location, and of course Morris Chang's vision.
Exactly. It's a remarkable story of how all these pieces came together to create the company that is now at the heart of the global tech industry.
But it's not just about technology and strategy, is it? There's also the human element. What about TSMC's corporate culture? What's it like to work there?
Well, TSMC has a reputation for being a very demanding and disciplined workplace, with high expectations for its employees.
It sounds intense.
It can be. But there's also a strong emphasis on integrity, teamwork, and a relentless pursuit of excellence.
I imagine that comes straight from the top, from Morris Chang's leadership style.
You're absolutely right. His values are woven into the very fabric of the company. He understood that building a strong culture was essential for achieving their ambitious goals.
And that culture is reflected in the quality of their products and their commitment to customer satisfaction. It's fascinating to see how these seemingly intangible things, like culture and leadership, can have such a tangible impact.
I agree. It's a reminder that even in a high-tech industry, people are at the heart of it all. And TSMC's story is a testament to the power of human ingenuity, strategic vision, and the relentless pursuit of excellence.
So we've talked about their history, their technology, their business model, and their culture. But there's one big question that looms over everything. What does the future hold for TSMC?
Ah, that is the trillion-dollar question. And to be honest, the answer is complex and uncertain. But one thing is clear. TSMC is facing some significant challenges in the years ahead.
Like what? What kind of obstacles are they facing?
Well, for one, the geopolitical landscape is becoming increasingly tricky. There are growing tensions between the U.S. and China, and Taiwan, where TSMC is based, is caught in the middle.
That sounds like a delicate situation. How is TSMC navigating that?
It's a tough balancing act. They're facing pressure from both sides to choose a side, which is a no-win scenario.
So geopolitics is a major challenge. What else?
Well, the semiconductor industry itself is becoming more competitive. New players are emerging, and existing players are investing heavily to catch up to TSMC. The pressure is on for them to maintain their technological lead.
It sounds like they can't afford to rest on their laurels. They need to keep innovating and adapting to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. They need to navigate these choppy geopolitical waters. While continuing to push the boundaries of what's possible in semiconductor manufacturing, it's a tall order. But if anyone can do it, TSMC can.
They've certainly got a track record of overcoming challenges. But their journey is far from over. We'll have to wait and see how they navigate these new obstacles in the years to come.
Agreed. It's going to be an exciting ride. And on that note, let's take a short break. We'll return with the final part of our deep dive into TSMC, exploring the intricate web of relationships that Chang built and what they reveal about his leadership style and the dynamics of the industry.
As we've been unpacking TSMC's journey, what's really struck me is how much of their success is intertwined with these personal relationships Morris Chang cultivated over the years.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? And what's particularly intriguing is how many of these crucial relationships began in these informal settings, like those dinner parties we discussed earlier.
Those dinner parties where billion-dollar deals were struck over pizza and salad. It sounds almost too good to be true.
Yeah, it might seem unconventional, but it speaks volumes about Chang's leadership style. He understood the importance of building trust and rapport, on a personal level, He knew that strong business relationships often begin with genuine human connection.
It makes you wonder if those kinds of connections are even possible in today's fast-paced tech world, where everything seems to happen online.
It's a good question. Chang clearly recognized that. Sometimes the best way to build trust is face-to-face, in a setting where people feel comfortable letting their guard down. He created an environment where open communication and collaboration were encouraged, even when dealing with these high-stakes decisions.
This whole story has really humanized the tech industry for me. We often focus on the gadgets and the technology, but we forget that there are people behind it all, making decisions, forging partnerships, and shaping the future.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the numbers and the specs, but ultimately it's the people who drive innovation and progress. And it's those human connections, the relationships they build, that often make the impossible possible.
And TSMC's story is a perfect illustration of that. They went from being an underdog to a trillion-dollar powerhouse. And it wasn't just because of their technology or their business model. It was also about the relationships Chang built and the trust he earned.
Exactly. He understood that in this industry. Your word is your bond, and he led by example. Demonstrating integrity and commitment in all his dealings, it's a powerful legacy that continues to shape TSMC's culture today.
So we've explored TSMC's incredible journey, from their humble beginnings to their current position as this linchpin of the global tech industry. We've talked about their technology, their strategy, their culture, and the pivotal role that personal relationships played in their success.
We've covered a lot of ground, but there's one final thought I'd like to leave you with.
I'm all ears.
TSMC's story is a reminder that innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's the result of countless decisions, collaborations, and a bit of luck along the way. It also highlights the importance of long-term thinking, strategic partnerships, and a relentless commitment to excellence.
Well said. It's been an incredibly insightful deep dive into the world of TSMC, and for anyone listening, I hope this has given you a new appreciation for the intricate world of semiconductors and the remarkable story of the company that's quietly powering so much of our modern lives.
I second that. It's a story that has something for everyone, from tech enthusiasts to business leaders, to anyone curious about the forces that shape our world.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and remember that behind every piece of technology you use, there's a story waiting to be discovered.